Here to one of our first official huddles. We've been having a few webinars over the last few months, but this is our first kind of one after the conference, and so we're so glad that you're here. And I'm really excited that Pastor Josh, you're here. This is going to be really fun. So a few things. One is that this is the first in a series of three. Let me take my glasses off so you can actually see me. This is the first in the series of three. We have another one coming up on July 1st and August 5th. And it's all going to be kind of a whole journey through this whole pathway. So if you're here today, write down July 1st, August 5th. They're both Monday mornings at 10:30. You guys can be here. And also a few quick notes before I throw it to you, Pastor Josh. I'm going to be muting everybody just so we, the keys and the random things in the background don't mess up either recording or just get distracting. But if you guys do have questions, we're going to have a Q&A time at the end. So just throw your questions in the chat box. I'm going to be here the whole time gathering up those questions, and then we're going to be able to answer those, or Pastor Josh is going to be able to answer those at the end. And if we don't get to them, maybe we'll find out some way to answer them. We'll put them on online, or we'll email you guys, or we'll answer them next time, or we'll figure something out. So like I said, I'm really glad you guys are here. Also, there's going to be a recording of this that we're going to be it's recording right now, actually. And if you guys want that recording, I'm going to be emailing it out to everybody who's here in this meeting, and then anybody else that registered that couldn't make it. You'll have it. So there it is. So I don't need to introduce Pastor Josh, and so I won't. Just say, hey, can you guys welcome Pastor Josh as he comes to share with us today? You're muted.
I'm good. I'm ready to roll. I'm in good company. I'm in good company, and this is going to be fun, having this three-part conversation. We wanted to do, there's no way we knew in an hour we could make it as deeply beneficial as we want it to be, so we're going to do it in three parts. And the first half, I'm just going to share some different content that's helped me, and then the second half of the call, we'll just do all Q&A, which is probably where the real gold will come out from each of us. It's really humbling when I get to do this with other leaders, because you never feel like you're at the point where you actually understand what's going on and you're just aware of how much you need God's grace. But you also over time realize there are some things that you can do to partner with just principles that work. And so I hope that some of those key takeaways you'll get. But one of my favorite stories when I think about innovation, and you may have heard this, maybe not, but it's a story where Watson and Holmes were camping together on the beach, and they had a little bit too much liquid refreshment, pounding the beers the night before, and basically they're passed out, sleeping on the beach, camping. And in the middle of the night, Holmes just starts jabbing Watson in the ribs, and he's like, "Wake up, Watson, wake up." And he's like, "What do you see?" And he opens his eyes, and he's like, What do you mean?" He's like, "What do you see?" And he looks up and he says, "I see stars, stars, and more stars." And Holmes says, "Well, what does that tell you, Watson?" He says, "Well, it tells me astronomically that there are millions of galaxies and potentially billions of planets. Astrologically, it tells me that Saturn is in Leo. Orologically, it tells me that it's about 2:45 in the morning. Meteorologically, it tells me that tomorrow's probably going to be a beautiful day. And theologically, Holmes, it tells me that we are a minute part of God's vast universe." He goes, "Why? What does it tell you?" He says, "Watson, you idiot, someone has stolen our tent." And I love that story, because to move in innovation, you have to grow in your discernment. There are varying levels of discernment and awareness that people function at. Some people ask the question, what's happening? Like, what's happening? Leaders with growing discernment, they ask the question, why is this happening? There's another layer, like innovation wants to ask, what's about to happen? Like, not what's just happening, not why is this happening, what's about to happen? And then there are some people that just live with the level of awareness that say, what just happened? Like we miss things all the time, right? And so discernment is so huge. I don't think you can talk about innovation, especially in a kingdom setting, without talking about discernment. And we're going to cover a lot of material in the first half of the call. I'm going to send my notes to Josh so he has them. He can share them with all of you. So just take what resonates with you. Don't feel like you've got to try to capture every quote, because I just want to be able to go through the content, let it hit you, and then you'll be able to go back to it. We'll send you a copy of the show notes. So Don't worry about it. But Charles Spurgeon once said, discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. That was Charles Spurgeon. Discernment is, we think discernment is, is this right? Is this wrong? No. We need discernment at the level between right and almost right. Because the stakes at what we do are so high. And thankfully, discernment is not just a spiritual gift. Proverbs says it's a discipline that you can grow in. You can grow your discernment. You can grow your level of awareness of what's happening in your leadership environment, in your people. Solomon, when he prayed as he was taking over the kingdom, he prayed for wisdom. We know that prayer. But if you look at the Hebrew word for wisdom, it's literally a listening heart. Solomon was asking, God, give me a discerning or a listening heart. And so it's a gift and a discipline. And in Matthew 13, it's interesting. I was reading one of IQ Spencer's like devotional books, one of those like seeding devotional type things. I forget what it's called, but they pulled together a bunch of his life teachings. And I was reading, he made a commentary on Matthew 13 that I had never thought of before. And in Matthew 13, it's the chapter where Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God, and he gives more parables about the kingdom than any other place in Scripture in Matthew 13. And in Matthew 13:52, he says, and then he said, therefore, every teacher or every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder or a manager who brings out of his treasure things new and old. New and old. We're talking about innovation. And I had heard Paul Johansson preach on the managers that bring out new and old treasures, and I thought I understood it, but IQ Spencer said this. He said, a scribe's job in the Old Testament before Jesus brought the kingdom would have just been to copy. Your whole job as a scribe, if you were a good scribe, you just copied what was, right? You copied what was and you rewrote it. But he said, Jesus brought a new mandate. He brought a new requirement that if you're a kingdom leader, you've got to be, you see people behind me moving furniture and stuff. If you're a kingdom leader, you are required now to bring not just old, but new treasures. God actually demands innovation of us because he is so creative, and in his kingdom, he requires us to create new realities to face the challenges that we are up against. There's no lack of new information that we're bombarded with every day. In fact, a study was done that said that if you take all the books, all of the news, all of the information, all of the speeches, all of the blogs, all of the scrolls, all of the newspapers, articles, podcasts, all of the information they could find from the beginning of documented history, right, until 2003. So the beginning of documented history to 2003. They said all of that content is recreated now in a 48-hour cycle between social media and news. The planet is producing so much written, spoken, and social media content every 48 hours. What took thousands of years. Now, every 48 hours, we're being bombarded with information. So there's no new lack of information. It's just discernment, what to do with all this information. We have to have interpretation and application, right? What does this mean? The ground beneath us is moving. That's what that means. It means that nothing is static. They used to say that in strategic planning, every year, about 20% of your plans should be adjusted, which after 5 years, that means your strategic plan will be completely outdated because the ground beneath us is moving. The earth is not the same. It's alive. It's not static. When we think about classical music, we think about Mozart and Beethoven and these different artists. But the truth is, if you really think about it, they never produced a single note of classical music. They were revolutionaries in their day. They were artists who were doing things no one else had even thought of. We now, after all this time, call it classical music. But Mozart and Beethoven, they were basically prophetic artists. They were doing things no one had ever done before. They were considered revolutionary in their thoughts. And so Erwin McManus recently said, and this is kind of an indictment, right, on church leaders. He said, to be called a futurist in the church, all you need to do is have a firm grasp on the present. He said in the church, a lot of times we're so far behind things that they consider you a futurist and way out there. You're an outlier. If you just have a firm grasp on what's happening in culture right now and not even trying to look around the corner and say what's about to happen. And so obviously I love the fact that you're leaning in. And to be honest, I think calls like this are so helpful because two of God's favorite values and things come into collision with each other. I think there has to be, for innovation, there has to be humility, and there also has to be generosity. Like there has to be someone who is willing to share, and there has to be someone who's willing to learn. And when you get generosity and humility together in the same environment, I think God just gets so excited because it's like two of his favorite values. And he's like, I'm going to pour out something amazing in this setting. And so, but we have to recognize the ground beneath us is moving, and we feel it. We know it. They're saying right now that parents that are raising Generation Z, like Miriam's got young kids, there are parents right now who will probably never teach their children how to drive a car because cars will drive themselves soon. That's scary to me. That's like the Jetsons. If people even know who the Jetsons are, like, this is like, what? I'm not going to teach my kids how to drive. Like I thought maybe I'm not going to teach them how to like put a key in the ignition because there's going to be a push button, or maybe not a standard, but there's actually going to be cars driving themselves in the near future. And so there will come a day soon where parents are not training their kids how to drive in a parking lot. A few weeks ago, I did an interview with some of the staff at Church of the Highlands in Alabama. And the philosophy of kids ministry is changing in a lot of places because they know that kids take in content in sound bites, not in sermons. And so Highland said, we're not trying to like cater to this culture, but we have to acknowledge it and leverage it. So they do their kids ministry now where they have their worship, but instead of having like a 12-minute talk or a 15-minute talk or anything like that, they do 3-minute YouTube videos, like 3-minute Bible teachings, and then small group discussion, then 3-minute clip, small group discussion. So they said, instead of doing like a 12 or 15-minute sermon, we do 3-minute clips and followed immediately by small group discussion because we want to train our kids for their desire for community. And we also recognize that they live their life in 2 to 4-minute video clips on YouTube. The fact that kids don't even really watch TV anymore, they just want to be on YouTube. It's crazy. Like, so rather than fight it and say it's ungodly, whatever, I think as church leaders, we have to say, how can we work with what is here and pivot it for the kingdom? Church online, when Life Church started that, there were people that said, you can't do church online. And I get it. We need life on life impartation. I get it. I can't marry and bury people online. But the truth is, church online works to a certain degree. And every single Sunday now, Life Church has over 250,000 people, over 250,000 people tuning into church. That's a conservative estimate because they're tracking devices, not people, right? That's insane to think that a decade ago, nobody, and again, to be an innovator, you have to have courage because what's known will be resisted by what's new. Like everybody says, oh, we love the new, but the truth is the moment you try to roll out the new, people will resist the new and hold on to what's known, right? Jesus said, anybody who's had the old wine doesn't want the new wine. Well, that's all of us at some point. We've all had things that worked and don't want to jettison them off. To bring cultural innovation, we have to be willing to pioneer the future more than we're trying to protect the past. Bill Johnson said this. He said, the fight to protect the sanctity of our history has kept us from a more significant future. The fight to protect the sanctity of our history has kept us from a more significant future. And we'll get into this a lot more over the 3 calls, but when I stepped in as the lead pastor at EGC, I was 27 years old. I recognized this is a 90-year-old movement in a over 20-year-old church. And a couple of things you realize right away, there's some benefits to being a young leader. You realize you know nothing and you're in jeopardy of breaking everything. You just got the keys to the car and you're like, oh my gosh. I learned quickly that you don't have to vilify the past to justify a better future. Like, you don't have to tear down what was, but you also better not worship it. I remember the Sunday that I got up and I pulled out a set of silverware that my mom gave my wife and I. And I said to the church, I said, I can't polish the family silverware. I can't give the best years of my life to just maintaining what was. In fact, I think IQ Spencer and our founding fathers would roll over in their graves and would be like throwing a fit in heaven if we didn't aggressively build on what was given to us, because the most honoring thing you can do is to build on what was given to you. And the fact that you have something given to you means that pioneers fought for it to develop it. But it's easy to forget that sometimes the very pioneering leaders that fought to give that to you are also holding on to mindsets that are very difficult. And I'm just saying, I really believe there's a way that you can honor what was without, you don't have to vilify the past to justify the future. You also don't have to do the opposite. Really quickly, the Spirit of God said to me when I took over leadership that there were going to be things that I needed to preserve, things that I needed to prune, and things that I needed to pioneer. And I think those are three great categories for every leader in a new season. Things that you have to, what has God called you to preserve that you have to fight? And maybe the new generation coming up don't value it and you need to teach them to value it. What do you need to preserve? What do you need to prune? It was fruitful before and everybody's telling you the stories of yesterday, but it's not fruitful now. We need to prune this thing or it's not going to be fruitful ever again. And what do we need to pioneer? What do we need to do that we've never done before? And again, we'll talk about some of the mindset that it takes to do that, because it takes tremendous courage and vulnerability to be an innovator. Another quote that Josh will pass along in the notes, Eric Hoffer said this, and I think about this all the time. It should send shudders like down your spine. He said, in times of change, which we live in continual times of change, in times of change, learners, the humble people, the teachable people, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to live and deal with a world that no longer exists. The learned find themselves beautiful, like inheriting the earth, but the learned, yesterday's teachers, find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. What's new is almost always resisted by what's known. And John Maxwell taught me, he said, if you make decisions based on yesterday, they'll already be outdated by the time you implement them. And I think we are very guilty of that in church work, because we don't want to offend so-and-so, and sister so-and-so has always done it this way. And well, we're making decisions based on, we know they're outdated even before we implement them, but because of fear of disappointing people, we let it happen. And I think we've got to address that. And that's why obviously we're on this call. Our history should always inform us, but it's vision that directs us. And sometimes people elevate their history above their vision, right? Our history should inform us. It should ground us where we've come from, but it's vision that directs us. You cannot let your history direct you. Another thing John Maxwell taught me, and I was in a season of transition when I went down for one of his trainings, he said, goodbyes can be good. I don't know why that hit me like a rhema word from God, but he said, goodbyes can be good. I always saw goodbye as like bad. He said, no, goodbyes can be good. In fact, you can't say hello to the new thing that God is doing in your life unless you say goodbye to the thing that God just did in the previous season. He is so creative. He is so committed to moving you forward. You have to be committed to not just what God said, but what God is saying, right? I feel like sometimes I made my boys on the verse board in our kitchen. It said, man doesn't live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds. And I just made them say it a million, proceeds. He's still talking. Religion so many times is based on what God said, but relationship is based on what God is continually saying. Can you imagine if Abraham just followed what God said? He would have killed Isaac. But he had a listening heart. He kept listening to what God was saying in the moment. And I think as leaders, I know for myself, a lot of times I just wanted God to give me marching orders. Got it. That's what you want. All right, we'll create it. But you have to stay vulnerable throughout the process and stay listening for mid-course corrections. I've never met a leader where plan A really worked out. Like you have a plan, you have something, you're like here and you want to move there. Plan A, like, let's be honest, it's usually plan M, like, or F. Plan A will rarely, like, fall in love with the purpose. Don't fall in love with your plan. There were times where I fell in love with my plan and I wanted to make my plan work. I needed to scrap that plan so quickly because it's the purpose that really matters. Who cares about the plan as long as it's not ungodly? Like just Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who's not in a favorable light in the public right now because of his divorce and all the things going on, but he is a pretty brilliant guy. He said, the people that are viewed as the greatest innovators in our culture are also the same people who admit that they're wrong along the way and become the masters of mid-course correction. One of the reasons why the Golden State Warriors are such a great basketball team is they dominate the third quarter all the time. Like, I've never seen a team win in the third quarter as dramatically as they do. And I'm telling you, a lot of times it's the halftime adjustments the coaching staff and the team makes. It's the mid-course corrections. And I think sometimes we think the plan is so holy that we can't adjust it, but really the purpose and the mission and the vision is what's holy. And we have to decipher between the two. And you, like we talked about, to be an innovator, you have to have courage, but you also have to have tremendous humility and deference, because you're not always going to be the idea person. Andreas hit on this at the conference so well. A great book on innovation, if you've never read it, by Larry Osborne, Innovation's Dirty Little Secret. It is incredible. Buy the book just for the 8 questions he gives you on having an exit strategy if your plan fails. He will save you your leadership credibility. The price of the book is worth its weight in gold. He talks about, not only do you need to listen to people outside of your tribe, because, for example, there was one of the top performing hospitals in the nation, and they couldn't innovate their systems. They just were stuck. They were the fastest ER trauma unit. Nobody could kind of come close to touching their systems. But as an industry, they had capped out, and they knew if we get better, we could save more lives. And so they did something that seemed so crazy. They invited a NASCAR pit crew team to come into the hospital. And because they said, who else has to work with machinery at a high pace, quick speed, under tremendous stress, and in a short period of time? And someone said, NASCAR pit crew, that's the same skill set they have to have. And if they shave off seconds, they can win a race. If we shave off time, we could save lives. Well, they brought in the NASCAR pit crew to train their trauma unit, and they soared. Like, they created new systems and they gleaned from them. And the point Osborne was making was, you have to humble yourself and listen to people outside of your tribe, your stream, your church. You just have to, because they're gonna help you. I talked to so many different churches that believe different things than Elim would hold as core values, because they just helped me grow as a leader, even though we may not agree on everything. So to be an innovator, you've really got to move in deference and humility to your team, but those outside of your team. In this issue of discernment really helps you, because sometimes you fall in love with innovation and you could become a serial innovator. You just like to tweak and change things. And discernment moves the conversation beyond could we to should we. That's a big gap between those two, because your gifts and your abilities and your desire can create things that God never ordered. To pull a quote from Jurassic Park, just because we could doesn't mean we should. Right? Think of Jurassic Park. Just because we can create this doesn't mean we should. I think discernment helps you say, you know what? We could do that. Our gifts, our ability, our team, we could do that. The church would give us permission, the elders, whatever. But should we do that? That's another question. Discernment also helps you know the difference between activity and progress. Most people get frustrated, all of us, not most, all of us as leaders get frustrated when we feel like we're working harder and we're not seeing the results that we want. There was an expedition team that was going to the North Pole, and this strange phenomenon happened where they kept checking their instruments, and sure enough, they were headed north, they were heading in the right direction, and they had picked up the pace because they felt like they fell behind schedule. And even though they picked up the pace, and even though they were headed due north, as they plotted their progress, they were losing ground. And what they did not realize was they had walked up onto a massive glacier, an iceberg that was drifting away from the North Pole. And though they were headed in the right direction and they were working twice as hard, they were actually losing ground and moving backwards. How many leaders can relate to that? Like, you have felt like that, right? Every Monday, you feel like we're working harder. I think we're going in the right direction. We've got true north. We're moving towards a mission. And so rather than taking the time to ask really difficult questions to foster innovation, we just throw more work at it. It's really kind of the American way. We're going to grind it out. We're going to work harder. We're going to throw money at it. We're going to throw personnel, resources, volunteers. And we just think that by sheer activity, we will produce fruit. And it's not true. It's not true. Discernment is going to help you from painfully spinning your wheels and working so hard and seeing little results. It's also going to help you ask the difficult question that sometimes around the table people don't even want to talk about, like, are we increasing our shares or our investments in a diminishing market? Like, this ministry that was so good even 3 or 4 years ago, is this like buying Blockbuster right now? Right? Like, do I want to invest in Netflix, or do I want to invest in, Family Video, who's out of business? I don't want increasing shares in Blockbuster, but somehow in a ministry model, we feel like it's unholy to say, it's just not pragmatic. This is not working. It's not bearing fruit. And I have to say, we only have so much time, people, and resources. I can't, Mark Rutland, one of the presidents of ORU that helped turn the school around, he said, you don't have to kill every sacred cow. You can starve some of them. And I found that sometimes, listen, you don't have to kill every little Bible study that's not fruitful and growing, but I wouldn't necessarily feed it out of your budget, and I wouldn't necessarily give it a lot of staff time and energy and oversight if it's really not on mission. It's kind of a distraction. The squeaky wheel gets attention, so maybe it's a lady that's been in the church for 25 years or 40 years or whatever. To innovate, you're going to have to frustrate the right people. Right? Jesus taught us, he gave us the perfect example. You're always frustrating somebody. You might as well just frustrate the right people. You want to frustrate the people who have a vested interest in your future, and they're not just trying to maintain something. One of the things that Larry Osborne says, because he knows how disruptive the innovation process can be, is he says, why institute a change when you can conduct an experiment? And I would just take that, why institute a change? We make these bold declarations when we feel like we know what we need to do. And now I'm a little bit more, hey guys, listen, here's something we're going to try maybe for the next 90 days, and let's just see together if it's fruitful. That way people don't feel as pressured. They don't feel like you're saying, thus saith the Lord, I've got a word from God, because you got a word from God on the purpose and on the mission, not on the plan. Like, just hold the plan loosely and say, let's experiment with this. Let's just see. I'm curious as the leader. I think it might work, but I'm not willing to bank all of my credibility and put all of my credibility on the table for a plan. Another piece of advice that Mark Rutland gave me was, he said, sell people on the process if you feel like they're leery of the product. Now I'll break that down. I'm not talking about manipulation at all. I'm saying when I'm instituting a change that I think a certain demographic in the church is going to struggle with, for whatever reason, I have to open the curtain and sell them on the process of how we made this decision, even if I don't think they're going to like the product. And this is how you do it. I'll say something like, it could be multi-site. It could be we're doing a new Saturday night gathering for college students. It could be whatever. And as a side note, isn't it interesting that many times the people in the church that have the highest sense of entitlement can be the quote unquote most mature believers in your church that are in that like 40 to 60 range. They are the biggest givers, but they also demand, expect, or require the most ministries focused towards them. And sometimes this is why we struggle to get money towards kids ministry or student ministry or reaching people we're not reaching. And sometimes you have to help them see that level of selfishness. But before you do that, I would say sell them on the process, even if they're going to struggle with the product or the vision you're trying to give them or the change that you're trying to institute. And this is how I would do that. I would say, I know some of you may not be as excited as some of us are about this new idea. I just want to let you know the process that brought us here. The elders and I have fasted and prayed. We spent 6 months talking about this. We've brought in different demographic groups into the room to ask them questions. We've hired consultants, really wise people. We've benchmarked with other churches that are doing this just to use wisdom. Jesus said, if you're going to build a tower, do your homework. And we've done our homework. We can't guarantee that this is going to work, but we can tell you we've prayed about it. We've sought wise counsel about it. We feel like we're going to put the chips on the table and make a risk to reach people we're not reaching. And even though it may not work out, we want you to know we've done our due diligence in the process of getting us to this point. People can honor and respect the process, even if they don't like the decision you've made. And it can help preserve your leadership integrity if you just show them the process. If you show up in the meeting and you've done all that process and you don't open the curtain and show them those steps in that process, I think you lose valuable buy-in from people. So let's see. I'm going to share just for a couple minutes, and we're going to open it up for Q&A. As a leader who wanted to innovate a culture that was going to grow stale without some fresh change, I had to listen to people's feedback that made me uncomfortable, insecure, hurt my feelings. People love to give you anecdotal stories to validate things, but the truth is, at the end of the day, you got to really look at the metrics. NASA has this big sign. When you go in NASA, it says, "In God we trust, all others bring data." In God we trust, all others, you better bring your data. Like if you're going to say something strong in a meeting, you better have some metrics to back it up and not just some anecdotal story. Because we all know how to spin ideas. And one of the things that Andy Stanley says so well is he says, right, we're married to the mission, but we date the method. And he says, the way you know you're probably married to the method is if people can't bring constructive criticism to help make things better. And so I won't go through it in detail, but in his book, Next Generation Leader, he talks about the 7 commandments of current reality. I think you can't even begin to innovate until you acknowledge what current reality is and get some level of agreement in your core leadership team on what current reality is. Because there are a lot of people that will try to over-celebrate something to justify its existence when you really just need a dose of current reality. And as leaders, we're hope dealers. Like we're wired to bring hope. In his book, Necessary Endings, Henry Cloud says, some of you need a dose of hopelessness. He said, sometimes you're injecting hope into a situation that it's expired, its time is over. And you're injecting hope into a method or a strategy that is no longer going to bear fruit for you. So you have to learn to not ignore current realities. Andy Stanley says, thou shalt not pretend, thou shalt not turn a blind eye, thou shalt not exaggerate. I love this one. Thou shalt not shoot the bearer of bad news. I was tempted to do that a lot of times. I'm like, just shut up. I don't want to hear about what's not work. Like, if you're honest, you've been in those meetings where you feel insecure as a leader when people start bringing up negative metrics. And you're like, I can't justify it. Like, I can't shoot the bearer of bad news. I can't ignore constructive criticism. And his last one in the current commandments of current reality says, thou shalt not isolate thyself. thou shalt not isolate thyself. And in a future call, we're going to talk about the innovation process that Walt Disney took his staff through that I think is going to be really helpful, because there were times where I thought the creative burden was on me as the leader. And then when it dawned on me that no, as a team, we create better creative ideas for innovation. But then I also thought that as a team, we could conceive an idea, refine an idea, and implement an idea all on the same team. And that's crazy. You really can't do that. And so we're going to talk about some practical things on how to divide your people up to make a dream conceivable, birth it, then make it practical, realistic, and implement it. And it really is not the same meeting that takes place in. So, Josh, I want to kick things over to you. There's a lot more we could cover, but I want to open up the floor for some questions.
Absolutely. You guys are all unmuted now. So if you just want to jump in with a question, feel free.
And disclaimer, I may have some good things to say, but I may also not have good things to say. And so I'm looking for the people on this call to also weigh in.
Absolutely. Hey, and just as a little side thing, we are going to end right at 11:30, just because we don't want to make sure, we could go longer, I'm sure, but we want to make sure we're respectful of your guys' time too, and not making you feel compelled to stay.
And we have part 2 and part 3. Hopefully you can make that, because we're going to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Anything that struck you or that you were like, I wish I could hear a little bit more about that?
I have one. I'll kick us off. How do you, you talked about it a little bit, but how do you know when you're just polishing the silver? And also, how do you know that sometimes, especially when you transition into a new role, you can't change everything at one time. So what are some of the things that kind of stuck out to you in your different transitions?
Those 3 categories. I need to preserve some things, prune some things, and pioneer some things. I think getting the right things in those buckets really matters. I think if you're a creative leader, you're going to get bored easily. Just because you're bored doesn't mean you should change things. You got to dig deeper. You've got to ask more important questions than that. I just think constantly evaluating what is fruitful. Like, how do you measure, is it just because it's well attended fruitful, or are we actually looking for transformation? And if we're looking for transformation, can we measure it in water baptisms, like every church is looking for involvement. Okay, well, how do we measure involvement? Is it just people showing up, or is it something more than that? And so I think just asking multi-layered questions. I think, so Lee Cockrell, who was the vice president for Disney for like over a decade, he ran, they call them cast members, I think, not staff. He had like 20,000 people that he was managing. And he said, your customers and your employees on the front lines always have answers to problems that you're dealing with as a leader. Your job is to draw it out of them through feedback. And I think that's brilliant, because a lot of times we feel the pressure like we have to come up with the answers. The truth is we just have to draw it from the right sources, and we have to be secure enough in ourselves to hear it. So he said, my customers always knew what needed to be improved. And my people on the front lines, if I could get them in a safe environment to be honest with me, and let's be honest, as the leader, you're often the most lied to person in the organization. People give you half truths. People give you what they want you to see. They share metrics that you'll celebrate, but hide from you the other stuff that's not working well because it may negatively reflect on them. So those are all things that you have to weigh in on. The other thing, Josh, I'd say is, if you're the one always coming up with ideas that need to change,
that's good.
There's another problem, because your team really should be giving you real-time feedback. They should be generating innovation, and you should be saying with discernment which ones should you go with, rather than you always having to generate the innovation. And I'll give you 3 signs, and this is something I would take a note of. When I was interviewing one of the pastors from Highlands a couple weeks ago, he said this. He said, whenever we visit the different campuses to give feedback to the campus pastors, we expect there to be a cycle of feedback and a loop of feedback. If you're not getting honest feedback from your volunteers or your team members, he said there's one of 3 things happening. he said, number one, they don't see it, which is a problem in and of itself, right? That's one level of a problem. They're absent-minded and they're missing it. Number two, they just don't care. So they're not absent-minded, they're apathetic, right? There's another like issue. And then number three, this is the one that you have to own. They're too afraid to tell you what they really think. They think some things, but they're afraid to say some things because of the culture that's been created. And I stepped away from that phone conversation. I said, man, if they're absent-minded, we can train them to look for certain things. If they're apathetic, that's a big problem. We can speak to it. But if they're afraid, now there's some things I have to do to make their honesty feel welcome.
Right.
That's great.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually living kind of in the opposite problem of what I think churches usually experience. I'm working with all young people just coming out of college, and they want to blow up everything. They want to innovate constantly. And and I love it. In a lot of ways, it's a really healthy and a really exciting thing. But how do I parse through, here's where this is good, let's move forward on this. These things, let's hold off on, while not crushing their spirit of sorts, kind of thing. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. I think, right, so there's a spectrum of good, better, and best. And a lot of times when we're innovating, we want to take something that we don't think is very good and we want to transform it to best, right? And I think as long as you could get them thinking, like, let's just get this thing that you don't think is good and let's try to get it to good, rather than like recreating it from scratch. Let's move it along the spectrum of good, better, best.
That's awesome.
Because you think we've got to kill it and recreate best, but you're probably not thinking about the fact that there was years of money, investment, prayer. This thing has actually been around longer than you've been alive. So if we kill it because of a one meeting conversation after decades of other people, you know what I'm saying? Like, you have to right size it for them so they can feel the weight of it, but then say, hey, listen, but this little pocket of it, let's try to move it from good to better. Yeah. Here's a question that I would ask often. This is some language I'd say, does it need a facelift, an overhaul, or a funeral? I'm not willing to give it a funeral unless we've tried the facelift and the overhaul. They want to just kill stuff and birth stuff. But you know, your job as a leader is to say, listen, being a father and a mother, being a creator is more of a responsibility than it is a privilege.
Right.
You want to, and how long do you plan on being here to manage the change that you want to implement with everybody else's credibility? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're an intern and you want to rename the church? Well, and that's obviously an extreme example, but I just think help right size it for them and give them an area where they can move something from good, better to best.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I just have,
go ahead.
Sorry, one question on when you talked about the things that, it's more the pruning and pioneering part. Like, we're a smallish church and we've just started to engage people in the conversation, as it were. So I've been doing this now for 2 years, where every year I survey the whole church and I ask them 3 questions. One thing that you thought really helped you, one thing you didn't find helpful, and one thing that you think God's laying on your heart. And with a full disclaimer that we might not act on all of it, but I will respond to each one. And since we're at the size where I can respond to each one, I get about 60, 70 responses. And it's been so helpful. But some of the leadership is a little bit wary. They're like, that just opens a can of worms, and, you're going to get people saying all kinds of stuff. I don't know what you think about that, but I feel that I'm at least hearing people, and it's anonymous. So unless people want to get personal and say, hey, I'd like to sit down and have coffee.
Sure.
I'm getting people in on the conversation, which I thought, that's just my take on it, but you guys could speak into it.
one of the things I would say is, you said, well, I'm getting people to talk about, people are talking about stuff anyways.
Exactly.
I want to know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, this is a mechanism for you to hear about what they're talking about on the drive home from church or whatever. Right. The principle that people have to weigh in before they buy in is very, very real. They have to feel, even if you don't do everything that they say or anything that they say, people often can't hear until they've been heard. And so you have to create some mechanism for them to be heard. Now, I'd be very careful on what I promise them. Like you said, you know, but I would even say, like, for me, I wouldn't even promise a response to everything. I'd say, I just want to let you know that our leadership team is going to read and process and prayerfully consider everything that's brought to us. But if I have to chase down 60 or 70 different people even to respond to them, some people will be offended at the length of time it takes for you to respond, or the you know what I mean? Like,
right.
You sent me a 3-sentence email and I've been chewing on this for 6 months, you know?
Right.
So I think you really want to use wisdom with that. When I ask people for feedback, one of the things that I would do, especially if we were going to do a new change, we would do a survey kind of like that. But we would ask usually 3 questions. We'd say, what do you like about this idea? Because there's got to be something. I mean, we can't be missing God that big. Like, it may not be your cup of tea, but there's got to be something. Like, okay, you're reaching the next generation. It's not my cup of tea, but what's something that you like about this? What are some questions that you have? And what are some ideas you have to enhance it?
Cool.
Like, how could you make it better? How could you move this from good to better to best? Like, be proactive. But also, I want to know people's questions, because from their questions, you can learn an awful lot. Like, I would choose leaders based on the questions they'd ask. I'm like, wow, I want that person around the table. Right. Or sometimes the way people would ask questions, you'd realize, man, we need a care team to go around them. That's a divisive person. I think they're going to get toxic if just by the questions.
Yeah. Right.
So it's a perfect opportunity. Like, transition, we're always in transition. It's the great revealer. Like, everybody's heart's on the table. And so I think, Judah, I think what you're doing is great. I would just be wise about implementation.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
I have to go, so I just want to say bye and thank you. And I wish I could stay, but I look forward to the next one.
Come on. Yes.
Already, so thank you so much, Pastor Josh.
You got
Thanks
it.
for being here.
The other Josh.
Bye, Miriam.
Bye.
Bye, Miriam.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have about 10 more minutes. Who else has a question that they want to share?
While you're thinking about a last question, I'll throw out a tool that can help you. And I see Craig on the call. We've worked through this tool called the 4 Helpfuls. Doug Coburn taught me this. He works with a consulting group called Intentional Churches. This tool helps. I can't even tell you how much it draws current reality to the surface when you're in a team meeting and you ask these 4 questions. What's right? What's wrong? What's missing? And what's confusing? I'm asking what's right so that we can amplify it and just fertilize the thing, multiply. What's right? Let's lean into that. What's wrong so that we can fix it? What's missing so that we can consider adding it? And what's confusing that we need to clarify? And then what we'll do is, you can use this for after an event to do a review. I always had a rule. I would say we have to celebrate before we evaluate. So, like, let's fill the right column and then we'll open up the other 3 columns, because what happens is you want to feed a sharp thinking team, but you don't want to feed cynicism or give platform for just critical. Like, if you're going to say something strong, critical, then you also better bring something good. Right. And then I would make the team vote a lot of times. If, like, we were doing an offsite or you're with a team of volunteers and you want to really know, like, what you might want to consider focusing on for the next 90 days, say, if you could only pick one thing on this whole board, on this sticky note that we've got on the wall, what one thing would you go after? And you make them fight and hem and haw and wrestle mentally, and then they vote for it. You know, the whole time you're probably going to give them 2 or 3 votes, but but you force them mentally, pick one. And then you say, okay, I'll give you another one. And then they pick a second one. And at the end you say, okay, I'll give you one more. You give them 3. And then you say, okay, based on what this team feels, you're recommending that these are the 3 most important things that we could focus on in this next quarter or whatever. And then at the bottom of the page, I'll just write core issues, and I'd write those 3 things. It's amazing if you foster an environment of trust and courageous vulnerability, like the information you can get from your team and from people in your church. They know what's broken and they know what's working. And many times we're distant from it, and we need to lean into their perspective.
I'm in the main conference room at EF right now, and we had 15 to 18 people around the table last week on Thursday, and we answered those 4 questions about the conference. It was awesome. Even with so much awesome things that happened, we still had things in each, because every single year we want to get better and have and nail down those core things. They're so great.
It's so simple. It's like changing the world on a napkin. I love those little exercises. But as a leader, if your primary job is to define current reality before you can change things, that helps draw current reality to the surface.
Yep.
Okay, so if I talk, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We went to the conference, and my husband and I are associates, not the main pastors, and been there a year, and old church, older congregation, but we somehow encouraged all of our elders, so our whole elder board was there. And it was so eye-opening, because we have come from some different places, and so we've seen more things, right? And they've been there for 25 years, and it's a peaceful, wonderful place, but they're really set. So as we would share ideas, they were kind of like, yeah, we really like the way it's been going. And so we feel just kind of sit back and go, okay, and so them coming and hearing what has happened with Elim and the changes, and even Chris saying, or you just said, I had to hear stuff that I didn't want to hear, and thought, who invited that guy, to this? Because I don't like what he just said. They were coming to us, and we were going to them, and I just felt like it was such a God thing for us, because for the first time, I think we've started talking a little bit, and I can't wait to see where we go. And I have all these ideas and thoughts, but I don't think I'm a dreamer like a lot of you guys, but I just know I have to take it to the Lord. But I feel things. I know there's stuff there, and I'm so excited to be a part of it however I can. So I say you're going, I don't even think I think as cool as you guys do, or I see things ahead like that. But I sure am open to whatever God wants to do. And so, yeah, we love the conference.
Hey, Josh, to tie in with what Gloria said a little bit, it seems like there's a pretty radical difference between, youth and age when it comes to innovating. How do you suggest helping older folks navigate that turn?
Well,
how much time do you have?
One thing that helped me, and this is a small example, but when we started doing a lot of online giving, I found, or our team found, I don't even think I came up with this idea. We found a guy that was in his 70s that was going to convert over to the new system of online giving. And we had him get up and explain to the senior citizens in the church, like, this is cool. This is simple. It's not as intimidating as you think. It's safe and secure. Those of you that fear the cloud and I needed someone from that demographic with a youthful spirit, but with some life and experience to speak to them in a way that I couldn't. And I think that older people were willing to absorb some of the things they didn't even necessarily like, because they knew that I was surrounded by wiser people that were older, and they knew that I loved them and honored them. And so I think living with the conviction that it's not just about age, but it's about youthfulness. Some of the greatest thinkers that I know are actually a lot older than me, and they think very young. And when you find someone like that, you have to show the other people in their age bracket, hey, this exotic animal that you thought was extinct is actually a real thing. Like, there are people in your age group that think younger than I do, and you may not be as extreme as them, but let's be careful not to generalize and be divisive with the generations, because anyone whose heart is, like Solomon said, open and listening to the Lord for discernment will get on the program with whatever God is doing in a new, fresh way. So Bob, I don't think that fully answers it, but it helped me taking someone that was older than me by quite a bit, that had courage and faith to say to other people in a way that I couldn't, hey, you know what? They're not crazy. They're trying to follow God. And I'm at the front of I found an early adopter in that age group. And then I also tried to find some late and mid adopters and draw out of them their questions and frustrations, so that when I was speaking and casting vision, I could answer questions before people asked them. So while I'm casting vision, they're subconsciously opposing the vision with their questions. But when I found out from other people I had a relationship with those same internal questions, it armed me in my communication to basically knock them out of the way. And then at the end say, okay, so now what are your reservations? And it helped me really a lot.
I'm reminded, Alex Seiler always tells me that one of the guys that pushes him the most is Paul Johansson with new ideas and pioneering. He's like obviously he's getting older and older, but he's still pushing the way. And so I think it's really, really fun to hear. Well, hey, we're coming up on the end of our time. Pastor Josh, I just want to say thanks so much. I'm glad that you're here with us. And thank you to everybody else who's joining us in. Obviously, we have 2 more sessions next in July 1st and then August 5th. But if you're also sitting here saying like, okay, I want to put this, rubber meets the road, how do I start moving forward? We talked a lot about coaching in the conference, and if coaching is actually a genius way, because it's helping you process and plan even some of the things that you're thinking right now. And so if you're interested in doing some coaching with some of our EF certified coaches, check out the website. We can get you connected. That would be an amazing way to start processing and moving forward with even some of the things that you're thinking right now. And then just some other little announcements too. Make sure you're following us on Facebook and Instagram. We're going to be doing some more, obviously sharing more about huddles and different things that we're doing, some news, promotions. Also, we're doing some giveaways in the next months, and also some things are only going to be on social on Facebook and Instagram too. So if you're not following us there, check us out. More huddles coming up. Next week we have a worship huddle. We have one about breaking debt next month. And then also the new EF website. Obviously, we just launched that, or not obviously, but last week, or gosh, when was the conference? 2 weeks ago. Yeah. We launched the website then, and we have a bunch of new features on there. One of them, it talks about Friends of Elim. And so really this whole huddle is even things that we're going to be moving forward is about saying it's not about credentials as the gateway to your connection with Elim Fellowship. We want to help ministers grow and develop in their calling that God's given them too. So check out the website, get involved, follow us on social media. And we're going to be back here a month from now, continuing this conversation. If you have more questions, you can email them to me. I'll share them with Pastor Josh, and we can start, answer some of those next time too. So, like I said, thanks so much, Pastor Josh, and thanks for everybody that joined us.
Thanks, Josh and Josh.
Hopefully, we see you guys again. We got a lot more to talk about for sure. Bless you guys.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Josh. It was awesome.
Bless you.
Have a great day, guys.
All right. Bye.
It's always fun to see who's the last one here.